Dr. Richard Calloway had built a reputation as one of the finest physicians in his small town in Alabama. His office walls were adorned with accolades, and his waiting room was always full. But beneath his prestigious exterior lurked a deep-seated prejudice, one that he had inherited from generations before him. One rainy afternoon, a young black man entered Dr. Calloway's clinic, clutching his stomach in pain. His clothes were damp, his breathing labored. Despite the obvious distress on the man's face, Dr. Calloway barely glanced up from his paperwork. "We're full for the day," he said coldly. "Please," the young man gasped. "I think something's really wrong," Dr. Calloway sighed and finally looked up. "Go to the county hospital," he said dismissively. "We don't take walk-ins, but I said we're full." The young man hesitated. Then his shoulders slumped. Without another word, he turned and walked out into the storm. Later that evening, Dr. Calloway sat in his office, finishing paperwork when his receptionist rushed in. Pale-faced doctor. "You need to see this," she stammered, shoving her phone into his hands. Dr. Calloway frowned and squinted at the screen. It was a breaking news report. Tragedy strikes local community. Prominent civil rights attorney found dead. His heartbeat quickened. He clicked to the video and saw a familiar face, the young black man from earlier that day. His name was Elijah Carter, a well-known attorney who had been fighting racial injustice in the town for years. The news anchor reported that Elijah had collapsed just a mile from the clinic and died of a ruptured appendix, something that could have been easily treated had he received medical care in time. Dr. Calloway felt a chill run down his spine. But then, another clip played. It was an interview recorded just a week earlier. Elijah was speaking at a community event. His voice strong and full of conviction. "I believe in justice, not just in the courts, but in everyday life. We must hold people accountable, not out of hatred, but out of love for a better world." Dr. Calloway's hands trembled. This wasn't just another patient. This was a man who had been fighting for people like him, people who had been taught to hate without reason. And he had let him die that night. Dr. Calloway couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the moment Elijah had walked into his clinic, the pain in his eyes, the unspoken plea. The weight of guilt crushed him the next morning. He arrived at his clinic with a decision made. He called a press conference and confessed publicly, admitting to the prejudice that had cost a man his life. He resigned from his position and dedicated the rest of his life to serving underprivileged Black communities, offering free medical care and advocating against racial discrimination in healthcare. He could never undo his mistake, but he could make sure it never happened again, and that, he hoped, would be Elijah Carter's true legacy.